There could be another carve-out coming to the federal carbon tax after home heating oil was exempted. This one would affect farmers. They're already exempt from paying the tax on gas and diesel, but Bill C-234 aims to extend that to natural gas and propane. The Senate is expected to vote on it in the coming weeks. The bill already passed the House of Commons thanks to opposition support and a few Liberals as well. Michael Barrett is the Conservative critic for ethics and accountable government, and he joins us now from the foyer of the House of Commons. Mr. Barrett, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So this bill will create a carbon tax carve-out for some farmers. Tell us why your party's pushing this legislation now.
Well, this is incredibly important at a time when Canadians are facing record high food price inflation. They're struggling with the cost of living across the board, and it's very easy to understand that when you tax the farmer who grows the food and the trucker who moves the food and the grocer who sells the food, it's a tax on the Canadian who's buying the food. And we have Canadians lined up in record numbers at food banks, 2 million per month. A third of them are children. It's incredibly important that we are able to take the tax off our producers.
Yeah, I mean, just to put it in perspective for our audience, I spoke to a chicken farmer today, actually from the Chicken Farmers Group, and they estimate the cost on average every year of the carbon tax for the average chicken farmer is $41,000 a year. Do you think that seems fair?
Oh, it's absolutely unfair, and we know that in the context of the news this week from Justin Trudeau's own Environment Commissioner that they're not going to hit their targets with their carbon tax plan, but what they are hitting is the pocketbooks of everyday Canadians with the downloading of costs that has to happen. The $41,000 that chicken farmer has to pay, he's not able to, absorb that out of his margin. That cost gets passed on to consumers, and this is why we have this affordability crisis, and Canadians are struggling to be able to feed themselves.
But the government does rebate some of the carbon tax for farmers, right? There is actually a rebate for eligible farming expenses that does take a chunk of the cost off. Is that not enough? Why not just leave the rebates? Why not just make them more generous? Why actually dismantle this whole section of the carbon tax regime?
Oh, well, just like we've seen with the carve-out that came in Atlantic Canada this week for Canadians, the 3% of Canadians who heat with home heating oil, this was done because people are struggling to be able to afford to heat their homes. Now, the Liberals have said that the carbon tax actually, people end up with more money in their pocket. And if that were true, then of course they would leave the carbon tax on, and people would continue to roll in the piles of cash that they make by paying higher taxes to Justin Trudeau. But that simply doesn't add up, and the same is true for our food producers, and that's why this bill that has gone to the Senate is incredibly important. It didn't pass with the support of the Liberal government, but opposition members and a couple of Liberals who obviously got enough phone calls at their office or grocery bills sent to them by their residents and heating bills sent to them by agricultural producers. They voted with us to send it to the Senate, and we're going to wait for that vote following the constituency week that's coming up.
Yeah, Cody Blois, Liberal MP from Nova Scotia, who led the charge on the home heating oil exemption, is also one of the MPs that voted for this piece of legislation as well. He's active on the agricultural file. You mentioned the Senate. There are a number of Trudeau appointees in that chamber who are not happy with this bill. They don't think it's fair. They don't want to see the parts of these things carved out. They don't necessarily want to see a tax break for farmers. What's your message to those folks?
Food doesn't come from the grocery stores. It comes from the farmers who grow it. And this tax system is absolutely unfair. It's doing absolutely nothing to help the government meet their environmental targets. They've missed 7 of 8 of them. They're not driving down emissions, but what they are doing is driving up prices. And it's so important. You would think that the honourable senators who don't support this legislation would take a look at the global situation and see what global events do to food prices and to supply chains. And our food security is so important, and we rely on these hardworking Canadian farmers to feed our cities, to feed our families, and they need to also be able to feed themselves at the end of the day. And the current carbon tax system doesn't allow for that, and it's just driving up prices. And I encourage all members, all honorable members in the Senate, to support this important common sense legislation.
Okay, so we know what you're against. We know you're diametrically opposed to carbon taxes, but we don't really know what the Conservatives are for when it comes to the environment. What do you do? Do we just abandon all of our emissions targets? Is there a plan from the Conservatives to actually try and rein all this in?
Well, let's be clear right out of the gate that the Liberals aren't executing on an environmental plan. That's a tax plan, and we oppose that, as you said. Our plan is to, of course, invest in technology, and the Liberal government has done everything they can to get in the way of approvals of tidal energy projects. Their red tape makes it impossible to get clean hydroelectric power built. They haven't got approvals done that were ready on the table for them, just ready for their signature in 2015 when they took office for LNG projects. And when our allies come across the Atlantic, come across the Pacific, and they say, hey, can we get some clean Canadian LNG? And our government says, well, there's no business case for it. It's absolutely ridiculous. We have an environment minister, Justin Trudeau's environment minister, doesn't even believe in zero emission nuclear energy. And we need to get the red tape out of the way so we can have small modular and very small modular reactor technology into development and put in place in our rural and remote and far north communities. All of these things would do so much more to cure Canada off dirty dictator oil and allow us to enjoy much cleaner environment, lower emissions, and it can be done with Canadian solutions. And that's a plan that's going to create good Canadian jobs, powerful paychecks, and it's not going to be a tax that does nothing to reduce emissions, but makes it harder for people to feed themselves.
In fairness to the federal Liberal government, though, they are building the Trans Mountain pipeline. That languished for years. They bought it. It's getting built. They greenlit the LNG Canada proposal out in Kitimat, BC. That's going to be $30-40 billion project, one of the largest private sector developments in the history of our country. They have done some things. They're working on carbon capture and storage technology. You mentioned technology. That's one thing they're working on. But even, Canada's Environment Commissioner, who had a report out this week, he found that even when we're doing the carbon tax and we do all this technological innovation, we're still not going to meet our 2030 targets. Is it your party's proposal to just abandon the Paris climate commitment altogether, just move on from that and go with something else?
Well, what we're seeing from the government today that says that they're the most ambitious in history on addressing their climate targets is that they're not going to meet those targets. And what we're talking about today is the important work that Canadians can do to reduce emissions while also making sure that we're creating good Canadian jobs. And neither of those things involve a tax. So we'll take a look. When we have an opportunity, JP, to go to the polls in a carbon tax election, Canadians can have a choice between a government with a tax on everything, on gas, home heating, and groceries, and a party that wants to put forward, a platform that will support a cleaner environment with the use of technology. And we'll take a look at what the situation is then with respect to how far they've fallen away from targets and how close we are to whatever deadlines that they've missed, and we are going to deliver better results for Canadians.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Ontario Conservative MP Michael Barrett. Appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you so much.